Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar called Reset Your Stress. I've always wanted to stay live from New York, and I am in New York City this week, and I'm so glad that you have taken the time to join. So again, I want to welcome everyone who is live and listening, and I'm very much looking forward to your questions and the discussion that we'll have together during this lunch break. And I also want to thank those of you who will tune in later. For me, this conversation is just one that I enjoy having immensely, and I think is also very much critical. And particularly as we think about our market landscape, our context. So for a moment, I want to tell you a little bit about how my work has evolved over time at Northeastern. I've had the privilege of being here for the past 6 years as a faculty member, and I also am an alumni like all of you, and finished my EDD in Organizational Leadership Studies back in 2011. And my training is as a clinical social worker, so I very much hold that identity as a scholar practitioner. And throughout my life, I've been working in the mental health field, learning and working to treat and prevent professional burnout. And so today, I'd like to share some of those perspectives with you, along with some of the research that I'm doing now at Northeastern, looking at things like what promotes resilience and ways that we can put into place thoughtful coping strategies in the day-to-day. And so as you're listening, certainly, again, at the end, I want to have a dialogue. I don't want to just talk at you. But I have a few things that I'd like to start off by sharing that helps frame this conversation and help us think about, again, what do I mean by this complex market? And I'm sure many of you are kind of smiling or nodding as you think about the landscape in which you're all situated. And it can be different for everybody in their respective professional and personal roles through the many seasons of our life. As we well know, challenges can enter very quickly, and there can be a lot of things that we experience that can often oversaturate us. So one of the things I'd like to share first, just to, again, begin you thinking about this with me, is thinking about what it looks like here in the United States and across the world in terms of stress levels and mental health situation and just this notion of burnout. And unfortunately, the statistics are not the best. I spend a lot of time immersed in the data. So just to, again, help us think about it together, we are really a nation and a world at risk for burnout. And burnout can be defined as a syndrome of emotional exhaustion, and it's also characterized by features like depersonalization. So sometimes that can look like a sense of disconnection or just feeling isolated or alone. It can also look like we work, just almost like in a robotic sense, where we feel mechanical and we just work until the point of exhaustion. And I often like to use the word depleted as I work with companies and as I work with individuals to be thoughtful about cultivating resilience. Because again, there's so much at risk here in terms of what we're facing. And so you can think of it like this, a lot of us are doing the work of multiple people. And again, there might be complexity not only in our work environments, but also at home where we might be caring for others. And, it's been said that burnout is the new normal, that it's inevitable. And I really have had the experience that this can be absolutely true, that we can certainly find ourselves in a mode where we're really stressed, and we're not quite sure how to make sense of that or what to do about it, but also that we can put a thoughtful plan into place that can actually help mitigate some of those consequences of stress and help us to really foster a sense of sustainability. So I love that word, sustainability, and I use it a lot. And I think about, times when perhaps you have just incredible deadlines, or again, you're juggling a lot of balls, and you think about how long could I keep going like this before that other shoe drops. And again, for all of us, we have different variables, but as I talk to people and as I immerse myself in this work, it's overwhelmingly obvious that this whole notion of work-life balance sometimes feels elusive. It feels hard to find, almost like a fallacy. And I also believe that there really is, it's difficult to often find balance. But if we are engaging in a thoughtful way of tending to ourselves, particularly our emotional health, it can make a big difference. And again, here in the U.S. across the globe, the health conversations have traditionally been very segmented. There has been a lot of stigma associated with stress or anxiety and mental health issues. And fortunately, we've made a lot of great strides. We've come a long way with that. But it's really important, and I think lots of organizations are now overwhelmingly realizing that the health of their employees really matters. And they understand not only affects the bottom line, but it's really important just for the human component of it. And so work-life balance can be difficult to achieve, but today what I want to share are just some things that I've learned in my research and in my practice about stress that maybe will surprise you a little bit and that maybe go against some of the prevailing sentiments around stress. What I've found when it comes to some of those sentiments is that people often think stress is just purely harmful. And certainly, as you can imagine, having worked in the field for so long, getting the chance to really hear a lot of stories and personally work with people, I've had a lot of disclosures and I've seen the ill effects of stress, and that's really what propels me and catapults me into being an advocate along these lines. I've seen people, unfortunately, pass away from stress. I've seen them have heart attacks. I've seen their families crumble into a million pieces. And so stress certainly can be harmful. I think one of the things that I like to challenge a lot is that stress can be harmful. And a lot of times when we're marinating in it or we're really whipped up or oversaturated, we almost get more stressed about being stressed. And particularly if you're that high-achieving person who just, always wants to, have your list taken care of and you go, 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 and you're really conscientious. A lot of conscientious people who are highly ambitious, who push hard, often fall into the trap of that constant adrenaline mode. And again, that is something that actually reflects some amazing values. Those go-getters out there, those of us who just love our work and we have passion, again, anxiety and stress can actually cause us to really work hard. So stress is harmful indeed if we're not careful and if we're not attending to ourselves in thoughtful ways. But stress can also be a motivating force that propels us into action. So again, this is just somewhat of a myth, right? It's like we think that it's black and white and that stress is just all harmful. But we know there's this other narrative or another side to the story. Again, another thing that people think a lot about, and particularly in the pop psychology literature, if you kind of hear those, type into Google, what do I do about stress? A lot of times things promise to eliminate it in 5 easy steps, and I'm not a big subscriber of that cookie cutter type mindset. We think that we need to eliminate stress, and that kind of goes back to the slide around work-life balance, like this thinking we could just have everything really be nice and balanced. Stress, in my opinion, in my mind's eye, in my work, in my professional and personal experience, I believe it's an inevitable part of our life. It's not something that we can necessarily close the door on and escape from. And sometimes we think we have to just eliminate it altogether. And what can become problematic along those lines is that then we spend a lot of our energy, trying to problem solve, work through things, and we're just not going to necessarily have a neat and clean resolution to something. And so rather than thinking we have to eliminate it, we also want to spend a decent amount of energy investing in a process known as self-care. And I'm going to be talking about that as I share my reset model with you today. But just remember that stress doesn't necessarily have to be zapped and eliminated. We want to be able to minimize stress and reduce it, but we also want to build our resilience in coping and again, be able to harness the energy or the eustress that comes along with it. So, I don't know about you, but this definitely resonates, the thought that stress can become a powerful teacher. So when we think about making the most of our stress, or this idea that not all stress is bad, that we don't necessarily need to eliminate it altogether, we can also embrace this notion that stress can become a powerful teacher. And for all of us, as we think about our life trajectory and the experiences we've had, both positive and negative, we know that things that have been very painful to go through have been a teacher. They have shaped us. They have perhaps cultivated a sense of empathy. And oftentimes when we experience difficulties, when we experience the process of resilience and we rebound from that, we know that there are a lot of lessons within that. Now, I certainly don't want to broad brush or oversimplify this and just say, you know, none of us at a moment when we're hit with trauma or severe tragedy or just difficult things in the throes of our workday or at home, none of us are going to say, yes, we're so happy, I'm learning so much from this moment. However, we know that over time, we can look at those difficult moments and understand, again, how they build character, how they build grit and resilience, and how they shaped us, again, into empathic people, perhaps. So stress can certainly also become a powerful teacher for us. And as I've said, stress can build grit and resilience. So again, when you think about the nature of stress, again, it can certainly make us sick. It can be difficult. It can wreak havoc. But it can also propel us forward in really interesting ways as well. And that leaves me to say that stress is paradoxical, right? It has these two narratives or these two sides of the story. And again, I think it's really important. I've spent a lot of time researching burnout and stress, and then as I've said, I have the privilege of working with lots of folks and supporting them and helping them to understand it. And I think it's really important because overwhelmingly what I see happening for people when they think about their own stress, it gets very personal. Obviously, we can think about exactly what is on our plates right now and what that means for us. And again, that can be extremely overwhelming and nothing that I want to oversimplify. But if we can be able to look at it in a broader way and understand that we are living in a context, again, this complex market, which really bears down on us in many ways, the levels of competition, for example. So in terms of unemployment rates or trying to find a new job, and we live in a really exciting time where there's so many opportunities, but that constant flux, that constant need to reinvent oneself, to rebrand oneself, to go out and find the new opportunity. You might hit a plateau at work and you want to step up to that next level. That certainly can be anxiety-provoking. And so again, we need to be able to understand that we want to not take burnout or stress lightly, but also that we can use it in powerful ways to reach our goals. So these are some of the paradoxical elements of stress. And this leads me to want to share with you some of the things that I've learned not only as a professional, but as a person in terms of engaging in a process that helps to cultivate resilience. So in clinical terms, we actually call this self-care. It's kind of a buzzword, and it's something that's gained a lot of traction over time, which I'm really glad about. So here on the screen you can see my question, what about emotional first aid? And as I've said, when we think about our context here in the US and also globally, unfortunately our emotional health, our mental health has been segmented. And we often aren't, able to think about prevention. So if I were to ask you, for example, what are some healthy behaviors overall, you might tell me something like sleep or making sure that you're eating well or moving your body well. But if I were to ask you the tenets of mental health, you would name some that might be similar to that. But I don't think there's enough public education and enough public policies that support us in being thoughtful about what helps us to prevent this burnout collapse. And again, particularly, as I said, lots of us are working more than the equivalent of many people, right? So it's like we're doing the job of 3, 4, 5 people. The other thing, I was recently at a conference in Boston, and we were talking a lot about just the over-checking of emails, and they asked the question, how many of you get up and check your email in the night? And a lot of our hands went up, and it was, just understanding that, that constant need to perform and be connected. It certainly has its merits, and it helps us to do our work well, but it can also get in the way, and it can cause isolation and distraction. So I'd love to talk with you about what emotional first aid can look like. And again, this goes back to that notion of sustainability. How do I sustain myself as a whole person? How do I attend to my emotional needs in thoughtful ways so that I can stay anchored down in the throes of life's storms? Now, some of us, we don't even know when we're stressed. We might not have an awful lot of things pressing upon us at one particular moment or season in our life. And then, as we all well know, sometimes things come up behind us and they hit us really hard. So again, the way I think about these practices is that they can really help us, again, with that notion of sustainability, but help us to be rooted and to not be, so fragmented or depleted that we're in a place that if something happens, we're less inclined to be resilient, that it's really going to be a devastating blow. So I'd like to share with you, again, from my reset model. And again, as I've said, this came from my clinical work, where I've come to specialize in working with adults to prevent and treat burnout. I've worked with CEOs, nurses, other clinical social workers and psychologists, teachers, and people from every type of industry, every age and walk of life. So that's been a great privilege. It's really informed my thinking. And then here at Northeastern, I teach in the College of Professional Studies, in not only the Doctor of Ed program, but all the way to the undergraduate level, where I'm the lead faculty for behavioral sciences. So I get to work with that full gamut of working students, and I can tell you that they are incredible. I learn so much from them, and they're high-achieving, ambitious students who, again, juggle a lot of balls and have a lot of variables. So this model that I've developed has really evolved from my clinical practice and teaching practice, and I want to share it with you today. And again, this is not a prescriptive, one-size-fits-all formula. RESET is an acronym, and I want to just share very briefly with you so that I can allow time for questions, specific components that hopefully will help you be thoughtful about what it is that you might be able to do to sustain yourself and cultivate a sense of resilience. Now again, remember, resilience is a process of adaptation, and it shows us that we're able to come back after we've endured some form of hardship. Now every day, again, just in the throes of taking care of ourselves, our families, and our work responsibilities, there's a lot, again, that comes at us. So even if you're not experiencing crisis, there's a lot here that can be used, again, just to help anchor you down. So the first step is realize. And here you can see I have this picture of a movie set. So picture yourself, watching a filming happen, and they say, take one. And then, of course, it's not perfect, so they have to do another take two. So the take one can be thought of as a primary appraisal. So in psychology, we think about appraisals as a process in which we give something value. And when we look at stress, when we look at the literature and what we know about stress and coping, we know that appraisals matter. And we know that those primary appraisals, again, when we are introduced with a trigger or something that's difficult, that it's a problem and it kind of maybe blindsides us, or it just presents challenges, oftentimes our raw emotions, our primary reactions, are a bit chaotic. It's sort of like we're just, reeling from the stress of it all. And that is a very typical human reaction. So as I've said, none of us are saying, yes, stress is such a great teacher. We want to bring that into our lives. We welcome, we embrace it. I think that's not necessarily a typical human reaction. However, again, when we're in primary appraisal stage, a lot of times the meaning that we're making, our understanding of it, is a bit warped. It's a bit skewed. And so we might be taking it very personal. Our anxiety might really be coming up and being overwhelming to our systems and to our thought process. And it's not until we move into that take two, the secondary appraisal phase, where we're then better able to see the resources at hand. So when I say resources, first of all, I think about our internal resources. Things like our sense of problem solving, our creativity, our sense of humor. Those are, our intellect, things that we've learned from past experiences perhaps. So resources that we have internally help us during that appraisal stage. And we're better able to see them during that take two. Now, at the same time, we have external resources too that, again, sometimes the blinders are on during primary appraisal and it's harder to see them in those moments when we have higher levels of anxiety and perhaps burnout. So we're able to take a new perspective on during secondary and say, in addition to those internal resources, I also have things around me that could be useful. So let's say, for example, your organization has an EAP program where you could access some free and confidential support. You might have access to a life coach. You might have an amazing mentor or colleague that you really know you can lean in on, or family members. And I think the other thing that's incredible, I often tell my students this, and I feel that it's been so transformative in my own process, is learning. You know, think about where we're situated and how we can get so much information that's useful. And when we're able to, especially here when we think about this appraisal process, when we're able to label or name a process and understand that it's happening, it helps us to prevent us from really going down into a mental avalanche. And so the information is also an external resource that we can really make use of. So realizing is about perspective taking, understanding our resources, but only doing that when we're in secondary appraisal stage and not trying to overanalyze when we're in the first appraisal, the primary take one appraisal. And I often tell people, if you're overworked, if you're sick, if you're tired, if you're feeling, you know, the ill effects of burnout, it's not necessarily the best time for an in-depth analysis of your life. Take a little bit of a breather and come back and revisit it when you have a stronger sense of facility to understand it better. So that's the realize part. Next is energize. I love, there's actually a t-shirt that says, running is cheaper than therapy. And we know that movement, whether it's running or walking or even chair yoga, all kinds of movement, helps not only in terms of keeping us physically fit. You know, a lot of times people think this is just about me fitting into my jeans or staying trim, but exercise and movement are really important for our mental health and our emotional well-being. And so energize involves movement. It involves, you know, trying to put your pedometers on, getting out and getting those steps in. The new recommendation is 10,000 steps a day. And again, for all of us, none of this is a one-size-fits-all, so everyone has different abilities and aptitudes and things at your fingertips. But trying to find activities that you can do that will bring impact. If you can work up a good sweat, that can mean a lot to our emotional well-being and that anchoring process that I've described so far. And again, it's very difficult when we're working hard, again, in all of our respective roles, to attend to this. It's easy to just skip it, but it really matters. The other parts of energizing include nutrition. So again, this is all about how we're taking care and nourishing our bodies. So the choices we're making around eating, how much water we're drinking, staying hydrated really matters. It keeps us well grounded and again fosters that sustainability. And then the other thing is human touch and connection. And again, in our context, we are in a time when connection becomes compromised by many of the distractions. And then certainly we all have different life stages where we might have the comfort of an intimate circle around us. And other times we might not necessarily have that. And so things like perhaps acupuncture or massage or other complementary and alternative healing modalities, those things can all really help the system sustain itself. And again, I think, you know, I talk about this in my book, but I have actually felt the sting of burnout personally and had to really institute a lot of these practices. I do this stuff every day. It really matters for my health bottom line. And so whether or not you're, you know, we're all in a continuum in some way or shape or form in terms of how much stress we feel we're experiencing and what our levels of burnout might look like. And that can wax and wane. Even when you take a new job on, right? That can be extremely anxiety-provoking. Any life transition can be really overwhelming and kind of creep over our wall of coping. So remembering what is it that's possible at this time. You know, let's say you have a long commute. Maybe you keep your sneakers in the car and you go for a walk at lunchtime. Or maybe you try to pack your lunch at least 3 days a week. Or maybe, you know, you treat yourself to a massage once a month. Or you try acupuncture. So again, it's about how do I take care of my body in a way that helps anchor me down in the throes of stress. So energize. The next part of this is soothe. And you'll see this if you look at a lot of, if you're like me, I love to read everything psychology, everything about wellness and health and self-help. And something that's often missing from the conversation is this notion of soothing. And what I always like to tell my students and those I work with is that when we're under stress, again, we're not necessarily going to just embrace that at every given moment. A lot of times we're going to want to get out of it. We're going to want to numb that out. We want to soothe ourselves. and counteract the negative messages that our brains and bodies are receiving. So soothing is about leveraging and engaging the power of our senses. Think how powerful just our sense of sight and our sense of hearing and our nose and our taste, and just thinking about, even our gut instincts. Our bodies, our minds, again, thinking of technology, or right now I'm in the city, like I said, so there's a lot of stimulation. And in a work environment, many of us go from meeting to meeting. There's very, very little time sometimes to come up for air, and that can lead to certain behaviors. So it can lead to things like clenching of the fist or clenching of the teeth. The other big thing that happens is that we hold our breath. When we're really stressed out, we can end up holding our breath. And so just paying attention to just the whole way in which we're receiving things. And the other thing is that if you're like me, always on the go, sometimes I've gotten into a very bad habit of wolfing down my food. I just eat my food so quickly and not really being mindful to pay attention to the wonderful flavor of the food, or just sort of being present with the environment and taking things in. So soothing is about using our senses in new ways, again, to mitigate stress and to help us to, just be present and to take things in to help counteract all of the overwhelm that we can feel. And so I always want to remind people over and over that we're going to do this in either adaptive ways or maladaptive ways. And I think we see evidence of this in terms of our obesity rates here in the U.S. The other thing that is a huge pressing issue is the rates of addiction, of prescription drug use, illicit drug use, and alcohol. And again, it's a very human part of our biological makeup to want to soothe ourselves when we're under stress. Now the issue is when we choose maladaptive ways, that really gets in the way and disrupts what I mentioned around sustainability. So it might work for a little while if we're coping with food or alcohol or drugs or other means, but in the long run, we're more likely to have that stress collapse. So if you walk away from one thing today, think about this notion of soothing. What is it that's around me? Even if it's something simple like I love my mug of tea, I drink it more slowly, more thoughtfully. It might be that you have like a favorite broken-in pair of pajamas or slippers, but I call it the before, during, and after. Whatever this thing is that you find really soothing, whether it's music or just time with someone that you really enjoy being with, think of it like beforehand. I'm going to have this opportunity to have this beautiful meal with someone. Then during the meal, you're really present. Oh, this is really good. This is nourishing to me. This is enjoyable. And then after, you can remind yourself, I did a great job. I took care of myself well today. I'm anchoring myself down by engaging in this soothing process. So next is unproductive thinking. And I want everyone to know I'm definitely going to take your questions. I can't wait to talk with you. So this unproductive thinking is really vital, and it connects very much with that first part of the model, which is realize. So we often get caught up in something known as rumination. So rumination is like when our minds are like hamster wheels. They just turn and turn, and we can't shut them down. We have a hard time doing that. And many times, when it comes to anxiety especially, that, often puts us in a space where we worry endlessly, that we're trying to work problems out in our mind without getting very far. Or sometimes we have, arguments with other people just in our minds. We are anticipating things that are ahead, and we're worrying incessantly. And that is not necessarily the best mitigator of burnout or stress, as you can well imagine. So what I encourage you to do is think about ways in which you can reframe and chip away at working at any unproductive thinking patterns you might have. And we could have a lot of webinars about all the different types of traps that we can fall into. I've mentioned a couple of just in terms of rumination or anticipatory anxiety. But what I want to ask you to do is think about the opposite of this, productive thinking. So think about things like learning or stimulating conversation. Think about activities, again, that really are a good use of your time. And again, I always say if we let worry rent all of the space in our head, what would it mean if we were able to substitute all that worry or anxiety time with more meaningful activities, that really could, make us very, very productive and really builds our well-being. So this is obviously, I don't want this to be an oversimplification, because I think when we're very conscientious people, I often say bright and high-achieving people tend to fall into this trap of rumination. And it's that whole ability to be very analytical and problem solve and be a powerhouse that can get in the way sometimes. And it can challenge us to step back and say, okay, I need to push here, but I need to back off here. It's a bit of an art and a science, isn't it? So finally, the T is about talking it out. And one thing that surprised me in my clinical work, I've had the privilege to work through the lifespan, so really from the youngest ages all the way, I think the oldest person I had the privilege of working with was 90. And my grandmother actually is a tremendous influence on me, and she lived to be 103, so she was definitely the definition of resilience. And so I really listened, to people I've worked with, to my grandmother, to people in my personal life, and you look about connection across the lifespan. And a lot of us would maybe make assumptions that as you get older, connection becomes more difficult, you become less mobile, perhaps you retire, and it becomes challenging. And people pass away. I remember with my grandmother, all of her siblings, she outlived 2 husbands, her 4 siblings, and many, many friends. But one thing that has really surprised me in my student population and those I've worked with clinically is the amount of isolation among younger people. People in their 20s, 30s, 40s, all the way through the lifespan are experiencing what seems to be more isolation and loneliness than ever. And again, I think it's hard because many of us just have never-ending checklists to complete, and our work and our life demands are really intensive. And perhaps, I think social media can be a great way to connect, and some people have surmised that it also can be disruptive. But it's really important to build a community, and especially when you're striving to prevent burnout and engage in these thoughtful practices that can really help you stay well, it's important to be connected with others who are also striving in similar ways. And I'm a huge proponent of finding a mentor if you don't have one, and I'm also a proponent of being a mentor. I think that really provides a rich opportunity to learn from one another and to support one another. And it's really important that we seek out, again, people who are positive, who are productive, that can give us effective feedback. I also believe having a diverse range of perspectives can be really tremendously helpful as well. We don't want people to necessarily just tell us what we want to hear, but we also want to be able to just, hear from all different sides and, have that contribute to our knowledge and our understanding of ourselves and others. And that can really be important. Now, the other thing in terms of talking it out when it comes to burnout is that most people, I was talking to a gentleman last night at a dinner, and he said, I'm so stressed out, I'm so burnt out, but I contain it, no one knows, And that's something I think we all do, and we certainly want to have our professional demeanor, and, we want to be focused and get our work done well. But I think that many of us are holding, a great deal of stress. And we do need to find those safe spaces where we can connect with people, whether it's our colleagues or our family, or even a therapist or a coach to help us, be able to debrief and process the difficult things. And again, throughout the lifespan, anxiety can wax and wane. So you might say, well, I've always been strong, I've never needed that, and now I find myself in a different place, and I don't know why I'm so overwhelmed. It's that as humans, again, we have great strength and great capacity for resilience, but we're also vulnerable. We're vulnerable to the effects of stress. And I think there's some great examples out there of people who have come forward who, again, many of us, I think, look up to, we respect and we admire for all that they've accomplished as people. People like Arianna Huffington, for example, who's been very public about her stress collapse, and many others along the way. Many in my field in particular have come out and said, this is hard for us too. We're experts and this is hard. And in fact, I share that in my book. I talk about my own story as I was researching stress and burnout and how I got to the point of depletion. I took, a sense of urgency in getting everything done, and I got really excited about what I was doing, but I took it a little too far, and my body and mind started to feel the ill effects of that. And so, again, I think it's important that we're in a space and a place where we're able to talk it out, where we're able to have healthy debriefings, and that we can get encouragement from one another in this conversation. I often ask people to link arms with me in this conversation because, again, it's not a joke. When it comes to burnout, it can really sneak up on us, and it can really take a terrible toll. And again, emergency room data is one example, one indicator. So many people come in because they're feeling like they're having a heart attack. It ends up being anxiety attacks. And then the other thing when it comes to heart illness and, so cardiovascular disease, cancer, we are at an alarming rate of these illnesses that co-occur with stress, and that we know stress has a big contributing factor around. And something recently that came out in the research is that women in particular have heart attacks at really disproportionate rates, and then they also don't end up having time to recover because, again, there's just so many responsibilities. So it's important that we have a community to help us anchor down because of this. So one burning question that always comes my way is this: do you think that people can change? And I love that question. It's kind of like, can you teach an old dog new tricks? And it's funny because, you can picture when I've been working in my therapy room, sometimes I have the chance to work with couples, and sometimes it's finger pointing like, oh, I don't know if he or she will change. And I think that sometimes we know that our patterns can be entrenched and it can be difficult to change our ways. I think the other thing is, this isn't just an individual piece here, like what do we do to sustain ourselves, or what do we do to prevent burnout? And that means either we're doing well with that or we're not. It's also really a systemic level. So at an organizational, at a systems level, again, I think there's really great attention being paid to how we can take care of one another better and leverage human capital. But again, I think that we have a long way to go in our policies and practices. And the thing that's really wonderful is research is showing more and more that when we take well care of ourselves, when we get the proper sleep, when we have opportunities to connect and to move, when we eat well, again, when we just take things in helpful ways, that really helps us to stay more focused in our roles personally and professionally, and it helps us to really be able to give more in a sense. So that question of is change possible is one that I would answer with an overwhelming yes, that human progress is always possible. What I would say, again, is that we have to link arms in this conversation. It is both an individual action, one that we can stay motivated around, we can set goals around, we can be strategic around. And again, this model, and how I describe it in my book, is one that you can pinpoint your goals and really have a plan so that you go, the extra mile. I think a lot of books out there and a lot of the psychology literature sometimes steers us in the wrong direction because it's like we need this whole life revamp. Instead, I think we have to look at what's working well, what we can build on, what we can tweak, and how we can make gains along the way. But again, it's something we can individually attend to, and then we need to stand up and say, collectively, our organizations, our society, our schools, our social institutions, our media, we need to do a better job not stigmatizing ourselves or others when they're experiencing perhaps burnout or depression or anxiety, that we can say, no, this is a natural human reaction to our context. It's very complicated, and it's very demanding of me, and I'm not a machine. And so being able to stand up and say, these are the things I need to make life work, to make it a little bit more reasonable. And I think, again, lots of companies have things like pedometer programs and ways to encourage one another, and there's great examples out there, and I think we'll see in our lifetime more being put towards this, especially because, unfortunately, we know the rates of anxiety and burnout are going through the roof, and this is happening at a time when also within the mental health landscape, less services are going to become available. We have a surge in the baby boom generation, in veterans, children and families who need care. We have a real, again, surge in obesity and alcohol and drug addiction. So you can imagine the system is being flooded already. People need help. But I always say that prevention is the key. We can't be reactive. We have to be proactive, and that's going to be the best way to sustain ourselves, given the complexity, again, of the workforce, of our personal life, and then just knowing that in our humanity, we can experience burnout and we can experience depletion. And instead, we really want to be in a place where, again, we can harness the things associated with stress that teach us and that leverage us and help us to set goals. And then also we can attend to the parts that are disruptive and help mitigate them, again, through a host of activities that are meaningful to us. So I would welcome the chance to have a conversation with you now. And I also want to share that I have some things happening on, Facebook and Twitter and on Instagram, and I have a website there. I'd love to come out and talk to schools and companies and organizations about burnout prevention and sustainability. And so if you want to continue the conversation, feel free to reach out to me that way. I also want to say I'm very excited because, I'm here in New York, and Reset was just acknowledged as the motivational book of 2015, which is really exciting. But I can honestly say I wish there wasn't a need for my work. It's like whenever anyone knows I talk about stress and burnout, it's like, oh, the stories just pour in. And again, I think by us engaging in a thoughtful process, in this process of emotional first aid, and us reaching out to one another and standing up and saying, let's not stigmatize ourselves any longer, let's sustain ourselves more, that can make a huge difference. And so to that end, I humbly am so excited about this, but I'm not excited that the needs are so great. So I'm so grateful you've all joined me, and I would love to take the questions now. So I don't know if the moderator is going to read them to me or if I just go down. Just let me know, and we'll get started that way. And thank you so much for all of your attention. So I'm just gonna. Oh, okay, great. So I'm looking here, and you can interrupt me, Amelia, if you want to chime in. But I see a question here. How many breaks should you take during the average workday? Are multiple short breaks recommended, or one longer normal lunch break? Well, that's a great question. So I think that there is not necessarily a formula here for that. I think it depends on you. I would personally say, based on my own experience and some of my research around just how we learn and how our brains function, that chunking out your breaks makes a lot of sense. So if you were able to, let's say, for example, get up and take a few short walks around the office or outside of your building, that could really be helpful. But I think, again, everyone's different. Some people would get distracted. It would be harder to get back into things, and everyone's situations are different. But from a brain research standpoint, the shorter breaks make sense. And then just from the movement, reinvigorating and getting up and changing space can make a lot, make a great deal of difference for us. So great question. So what suggestions do you have? This is from Desiree. What suggestions do you have for dealing with our professional environment, boss, colleagues, and business partners as you are working through reducing your stress? So that's a great question, Desiree. And I think that communication and our skills, many of you hopefully are familiar with the construct of emotional intelligence, so that really helps us to navigate the complexities of our work environments and to communicate effectively. And certainly, again, I never want to sugarcoat. Our work environments can be really brutal and they can be challenging, and our relationships at work can be very multidimensional and sometimes difficult. So I think one thing is that, boundaries are really important. So a lot of times, if we are, again, really curious or eager people, or we're just in a role where there's a high level of responsibility, it's easy to take the bait on everything and get pulled into a lot of projects and a lot of responsibilities and to say yes to everything. And I think, again, in most work cultures, it's very hard to set a boundary. There's a pressure, and I know even in my own work, I find myself not wanting to say no because I don't want my other colleagues to have to bear the burden if I'm not able to do something. So I think that's the reality in all of this. But I think it's important to try as best as you can to have an influence on the culture at your work. So I think trying to find allies, with your peers, for example, like, these are things we're going to do, or these are things we're going to suggest. A lot of it hinges on our capacity to communicate and to say, I know about myself that I'm going to be much more effective when I, have this opportunity for a short break, or when X, Y, and Z happens. So it's having that insight and awareness on what works for you. How do you function the best? Is it that maybe you need one day at home to telework, or thinking about all the different things that are going to make you perform your best and be your best. And that's the great thing, is research is going to back you up, because we know that when we bring out the best in people and we support them in cultivating their well-being and attending to it, that they are going to do better. So research is going to back you up. And I think it's about, again, talking to folks and showing them that I can be very positive and productive, but I need to take back something. And again, boundaries, communicating our boundaries, what our bandwidth looks like, can really help with that. It's very easy for us to just get sucked away, and I've seen that overwhelmingly in so many institutions and organizations. There's just enormous pressure. Okay, another question. What suggestions do you have? Okay, I've got that. Okay, and I will be real with, okay, yeah. So it sounds like other people are in that situation. Okay, so I'm not seeing any more questions, but I'd love to take more if you have any, so feel free. Great, so I see Desiree, thank you. I'll check the website and look for the book on Amazon, so thank you. And for everyone, again, that has tuned in this afternoon or who will tune in later, it's just been a privilege to facilitate this discussion. And again, as you reflect, think about maybe just one or two things that you might be able to start to institute as part of your change process. And I wish you all the best in all of your respective roles professionally and personally. Thank you so much, and take great care, everyone.